Hey everybody, it's Booksy. This is Sunday, December 12th, and I'm going to do an ATER update. Should be a pretty quick video today because I'm just going to look at a comparison between sort of the last time we were in this same fractal region and the previous time we were in this fractal region. We'll just talk about what it is I'm seeing and whether or not I think that we do need another move down. So last video, I talked about this head and shoulder pattern that was set up. Somebody pointed out like, hey, there's an inverse head and shoulder here too. And I said, yeah, I drew it. The reason I had drawn this line originally was because I saw this as an inverse head and shoulder pattern. And as I was looking at it and looking at the price action, what we saw on Friday, it was just, I think it was a little odd. I saw this walk down that happened, and I was expecting it to be a little more brutal, to be frank. Like in previous times when this thing has moved back through, you can see when it's moved back through the wedge, almost every time it moves pretty quickly. And I know that I'm just looking at one reference point here, but if we're looking at other reference points as well, you would agree. Like I don't have them up right now. I'm not going to go through them, but they're in previous videos. I showed a lot of those little downward rectangle patterns, or excuse me, triangle patterns as it came down through here. And one thing that I was looking at with the fractals was volume, right? Like you see how the volume spikes, instigates a sell-off, kind of settles, and then there's a major volume spike that sort of is the final push down. And the more I stare at this, the more I think that there's a possibility. It's a possibility. There's a possibility that we're actually more or less like right here. And originally, the reason that I didn't think that is because I thought that this early breakout was too insignificant. It just didn't have any gravitas to it. It was really small. It doesn't really matter how you chart it. There was this earlier one, which I attributed to just being like a normal wedge breakout. I mean, these happen on this stock all the time, where you get these dips down that are like liquidity tests, and they just dip out of the region, the wedge region, for a little bit. And then, if you look at even charting it like this is a little more accurate. You get nice touch points right underneath, right? And this seems pretty good, but I just couldn't see this as being the initial break. It just doesn't feel strong enough to me. It barely came out of the bottom here, and then it barely came out of the top. And nothing about it, to me anyways, was like, okay, this is definitely the break. Whereas here, it's like nothing was really respected. And that to me was kind of interesting. I never really found strong touch points here. And again, like even if we were just drawing it with, I don't know, those touch points in mind, you can make it a little wider and say like that's where it should have been, or tighter. And you could say, well, there's tiny little touch points here before it breaks down. And you do have some volume indicators here, or volume indication down here, that maybe these push downs were pretty strong. You hear that? That's a train in the background. Apparently it's gotten into a lot of my videos. This is curious to me though, this right here. And my expectation is that it's one of two things. You either have a longer period above, like such as here, because when you look at this and this region look very similar. They both have this kind of W look right here. This one has a quick sell to touch, and then it becomes sort of a W, and this is kind of what happened right here, right? So if we're looking at these and we're just doing fractal analysis, we're not doing anything else, a case could be made that this is, the first move up. And we haven't quite gotten through here yet. Maybe we just got to that point, right? You see this sort of a dip back in and then a leveling. More than likely, my drawing is just a little bit off, and that dip is actually to retest the top of the wedge. line. So it might be more like so. You see that? So it touched and it hovered above it, and then it came through and retested it. So that's a possibility. We're still in this region that we just haven't quite gotten through yet. Maybe we would be like right here. And if that were the case, then on Monday, I would expect to finally just kind of drop through. And if you look at the volume, it's been a pretty hard push last couple of days to try to get it back down. And these took several days. These were like 2-day periods. This was about a day. This was about 1, 2, almost 3 days of down. So the time on these things doesn't matter as much as just the general price action of the stock. And I don't really think that when you're doing fractal analysis, you need to worry too much about that kind of thing. We got the touch. That's what we needed. We identified that's definitely a touch point. The question now that I have is this the actual 1, 2? In which case, this is really part of sort of the second move. And what that would look like, if you're wondering what I'm thinking here. So let me hide this for a second. Like you don't see it, is that this is actually this wedge. This is what it would look like. There would still be this head and shoulder, but you would instead interpret this as the first breakdown. That this is the real first run right here. The 2 U's. And the second run is this whole region essentially is setting up a second run. And in some ways it doesn't even matter, because if you look at this as one or the other, it doesn't seem to make a really huge difference, right, for the charting. The way you chart these things, typically I try to go from the top point, and when I get to the region that we were talking about, this region, what I've been doing is looking at this as sort of the start of the bull. You see that? And if you were doing it from that perspective, then this looks like a really weird kind of U shape, and it never really touches correctly. So the way that you should probably be doing it is more or less like this, right? Which is more of an intersect of this line than actual W. But you could see with this, yeah, sure. I mean, it trends up right there really sharply. So certainly, like, it's a possibility that this region is the same as this region, and that we got enough of our tests done of the wedge. And then if that were the case, then what we'll see on Monday is it may dip down a little bit, and then it'll just kind of start moving up. And it's probably going to be more tight movement. This is the 13th. You see it maybe start moving out of here. You get these sharp liquidity spikes. And that's option number 1. Option number 2 is that we follow this green pattern. We end up seeing that, well, no, we're not there. We're in an earlier, or we're in the first cup, and we're actually going to see this action play out, right? I could see it either way, and I think you can make an argument for either one, because I do believe that this fractal and this fractal are essentially the same. And it makes sense that they would be, but it is confusing for our purposes. And I'm not finding any definite yes or no's when I did like an investigation on them. So this right here is kind of the big question. Like, was this considered the first dip out of the, and if it wasn't, then no. I mean, we're not done, right? We're going to see this drop finally back down to the 4 region and then push up. But the price action on Friday, I mean, if they wanted it down below, I think it got down to that we said between 450 and 5. It got there, but if they wanted it lower, I mean, they could definitely do it. So we'll see on Monday what happens. But those are both those are both bullish scenarios. One just has a little more downside, and then we start moving up, right? Maybe downside, rattle around a bit, pop out, come back down, right? Sell off one more time, retest. two scenarios, right? One, go down, rattle around a bit, we pop back up, we retest this region, then we come here and we move up. Scenario number one. Scenario number two is that we're right more or less in this region, and maybe we see it finally like dip down. Then we really quickly recover, and we see it when it breaks this, it's going to run a little hard, perhaps. And yeah, that would be the more bullish scenario for the time being. Bearish scenarios, you know, people always say like, well, just draw a line to $1 or something. Look, if you've been following me for any time, you know that I do not believe that's the case with this stock. I think it's foolish and silly to say that just because it's been selling off for a little while. You have to look at this thing on the macro, and the macro is accumulation. Like, you can ignore this stuff. This is me like trying to learn stuff. Look at all this junk. The macro is accumulation. It's plain and simple. You know, we had a primary sell-off, we had a distribution phase, then we had a spring and a test. And after the test, I mean, it bounced hard, didn't it? And it broke the mold. I mean, that's super bullish. So when I'm looking at this, I can't help but think that this is just one huge, and obviously the OBV, we've talked about that a lot. The OBV has been trending up since March. Which is a huge divergence, and it's been like a multi-$100 million of divergence. I mean, it's just humongous. So there's no way to, I don't think there's really a way to make a bearish case at this point, except that somebody wants this thing to drive into the ground. But even if this were to like fall down further, like that doesn't necessarily mean that it's done for. Like it could easily just need a second sort of spring region and another test, and this could just be part of the downtrend, right, until you get there. So for someone to say like this has to go to $1 just because I feel like it, that's not really DD in my opinion, or just because it's been selling off. Again, it's just not really DD. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Definitely hook up with the Discord if you can. Trader Girl's on there. She's really good, gives really good information about the options chain. She's done a lot of research. And there's a few others on there as well who provide a lot of really good insight into the background workings of the stock, of the company itself, and then also the markets, what we're seeing overall with certain reports coming out and this and that. It's a good place to get some information beyond just me doing fractal stuff. So hope you all have a good one, and we'll talk to you later.